Welcome everybody. I've got Jerome C. Glenn here, who's a co-founder and director of the Millennium Project, also well known for inventing the futures wheels technique, and among other things is also the primary author on the annual State of the Future report and editor of the Futures Research Methodology. Jerome organised a Follow the Sun Future Day project last year, which was around the clock. Future Day project, which started, I guess, well, early in the morning on in an early time zone through to.
Well, it started. Each place was at 12 noon, so it started, I think, in Australia or New Zealand. It started in New Zealand, I think, at 12 noon, and then each 12 noon all around the world.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so many people joined that discussion online, and yeah, had a very, very exciting and long Future Day event. Okay,
Yes.
so let me ask you, what actually got you interested in Future Day, and what was it that stuck out for you to get you
Good
on
question.
board?
I was at the University of Massachusetts doing the doctoral program there. This is back in early 1970s. And we had a Future Day there, and then the program phased out over several years. Then somebody else did another Futures Day somewhere, and that phased out over a while. Then I heard about your Future Day, so I said, look, let's make this thing stick. You're going to keep reinventing it all the time, and it's a good idea. So I figured if we did a round-the-world conversation, that would spread the word around the world, literally. And so it would sort of reinforce that let's all cooperate and create Futures Days together, whatever your ideology is, whatever your interest is. We ought to have a Future Day around the world. So that's why we did that.
Okay.
Just to reinforce that it keeps going on, so it doesn't peter out, so to speak, like the other Future Days.
Right. So in the past, what do you think caused the previous Futures Day to peter out?
Good. They're dependent upon one or two people.
Hmm.
And when those people change, it's gone.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why you got work with World Federation, the Millennium Project, all the rest of these different groups around the world, so that even if you decide to go off on a trip in Mars, the thing will continue on without you.
Mm-hmm. I didn't sign up for that. I'm thinking that if I wait a few decades,
Oh,
it'll
you want to
become very
return to
cheap.
that?
Yeah, I want to
You want
return
to
to it.
return?
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah.
So
All right.
yeah, why Future Day anyway? I mean, like, what's all the buzz about to you in your mind? Why should we be having a day of focus on the future?
Well, it causes people to think twice about what's possible, giving an opportunity to do that. Why not? It's just an excuse for people to think. Um, uh, as you know, people don't take the long-range future as seriously as we would like, and because of all of the reasons that you're well aware of and your audience are well aware of, they don't need to repeat. We've got to do that. So any mechanism that triggers people to do that in a reasonable way, I'm in favor of. And having days to do that is one of those mechanisms.
Hmm. Yeah, it seems as though there's so many days out there that are celebratory or in recognition of something that has happened. Something that's that people can look back and say, yes, we remember this day in history where we went to war, or when somebody died on a cross, or when somebody was reborn, or something
Right.
like that. And so, look, that's fine. It's great to remember history. We learn lessons from it. But there doesn't seem to be much in the way of any anticipatory event, anything that causes us to think about where we're all actually heading into the future, right?
Yeah.
The only thing I could say is maybe New Year's Eve or New Year's Day when we make our New Year's resolutions. Yeah,
Yep.
it's not really focused on that.
Yep.
Mm. So yeah, you've done a lot for futurism in the history here. You got involved with the Millennium Project, the co-director. How did that come about?
Well, I used to be the liaison between the United Nations University headquartered in Tokyo and the United States. And I brought together a bunch of think tank reps, Washington, to introduce the head of the university to them in Washington. And one of the reps was from the president of the World Future of the Futures Group, Futures Consultancy. And they said, "Hey, we want to do this Millennium Project. Would you make it happen? Because it ought to be within the UN system. Because if the idea was the year 2000 was coming up, and we ought to have some big mega study to say what people thought about the future when it happens." And I said, "I don't want to do that. What I want to do is create a mega system that can create mega studies very quickly. Like you'll notice last year, I agreed to do that round the world conversation 1 week before Future Day."
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about all those people, over 800 people around the world had cooperated and did that activity, that was very fast and no budget. Total volunteer around the world, different time zones. Well, we created a system that can quickly do those things because there's been tons of future studies. Much of the history of futures research is these big mega studies. Everybody applauds. They have the wine, they have the champagne, they get in the airplanes, they go home, and that's it.
Mm.
So what we need is an accumulative system that builds on the past. It doesn't just do one report as if the other one wasn't created the day before. We need to do a collective intelligence, accumulative over time. So we created it within the feasibility study within the UN University, and then it moved back to the American Council for UN University, which is that liaison function. And we stayed there for some years, and we went independent eventually because it's really difficult to have a bunch of really relatively creative people outthinking each other within a bureaucratic system. Bureaucracies, by their nature, don't tend to like that activity. So it was very important to be born within the UN system because it let people know around the world that our interest was in human beings, not in nation states as such, or in one ideology or another ideology. So we got right wing, we got left wing, we got a node in Iran, we got a node in Israel, and so we needed a think tank on behalf of we human beings that didn't focus on just one issue or one country or one ideology, but we human beings. So that's how that evolved. And another part of it too is I had worked for different think tanks, and I was very tired of people in one think tank saying, "Well, that think tank is wrong." Well, no one gets everything right. No one gets everything wrong. There's good stuff in all of them. There's bad stuff in all of them. So you can, use your head and think. And that's not the predominant mode. The predominant mode is a bunch of ideological spins, wherever they happen to be. And I was just tired of that nonsense.
Mm-hmm. So it's funny. I found that as you graduate from childhood to teenage years, everybody around you suddenly becomes very wrong. And then, as you graduate a little bit older, and then you well, at least with me, I just didn't want to be wrong myself. But it's not really the right way to go because innately we're all wrong, as you said, to some degree, and we shouldn't shy away from trying to approach the truth in fear of being a little bit wrong or a lot wrong in any area. I guess thinking about the future requires us to think in a very novel way. And often novelty, like science fiction, can be very, not necessarily misguided, but, in hindsight might be very wrong. But it's worth its weight in gold for the times that we are right, and also what we learn from being wrong. So
Yeah.
I think being wrong is good.
Yeah, one of the things that we're getting prepared to do now is to take a look at the future of work and high-tech relationship. Because you've got really two quite different, opposed thoughts around the world on this. One says, well, every age creates more jobs than is replaced by the previous one. And the other one says, no, the rate of change and the interdependency and the instant copying and updating of artificial intelligence, synthetic biology, and robotics and all is so much different than the previous that we're going to have structural unemployment, half the world unemployed by 2050. Well, these are two really different views of what is going to happen. So we're interested in exploring both of these and bringing together the best thoughts and see what happens. Clearly, one or the other is going to be both wrong about something.
Yeah, right. And
that's what you're right about.
Being too committed to an ideology may cause you to be a bit blindsided when the actual when reality comes to bear.
It brings up the word futurism that you used early on. Ism,
Futurology. Did I say futurism?
you did.
Okay,
You
sorry.
can go back to the tape. Anyway, oh, good. Okay, because futurism, people, that's an ideological type of phrase. But you
Yes.
can call it futurosis, you can call it anything, but not ism.
Yes,
We're trying to open
futurism.
people's brains up. Yeah.
Futurism, I learnt the hard way while I was actually hosting the first Singularity Summit Australia. And I said, I introduced a panel and I said, so what are your thoughts on futurism? And one of the panelists said, well, I'm not all that into like a fascist art, so
Right,
yes.
good. Who said that? Is that Jim Dater?
No, Jim Data wasn't there, but I would have liked to. I definitely want to speak to. I've been in email contact with him, but he would be an awesome person to be able to speak to.
Right.
This was in
Who was
Melbourne.
it
He's in
brought up
Hawaii.
about the fashion? Who
Lev
brought up the
Layafet.
fashion?
Lev
Okay.
Layafet. Yeah. Lev.
I
Yeah.
don't know that.
He's a local. He's a good guy.
Good.
He's very
Good for
smart.
him.
So.
Or as you say in Australia, good on you, mate.
Good on you, mate. How's it going? G'day. Shrimps on barbies and yeah,
Right.
walking the wallaby. So. Yeah, well, I mean, it's great that you're on board with Future Day. I tell you that, and we need some people who have been active in the futures community, for some time, because I think they hold some sway. Over time, they've gained quite a bit of listening, and people trust people who've been in the scene for quite some time. So I thank you for getting on board. It's really good. Yeah, and also not just saying something, but actually doing something, which is really good. And I applaud your energy. And I'd like just to say at this point, anybody interested in hosting a Future Day or getting involved with some online meeting should just do it. I mean, it's a great opportunity. We want to get Future Day into schools, and I want to ask you, what's your opinion about how to approach, I guess, futures education in not necessarily really early childhood developmental education, but like something like upper primary school to high
Yeah.
school. Mm.
Well, that's what got me into futures business to some degree to begin with, because when I was looking at futures, a lot of people thought this was too advanced for elementary school. So I immediately started working with daycare centers. And that's where the futures wheel came out of, actually, is I would say to somebody, all right, these are like little kids. Okay, what's happened recently at home? One kid says, well, the uncle has come in to visit. So I said, okay, uncle, put a little circle in a piece of paper, uncle came to visit, circle around that. What else happened as a result of that? Well, I got to move out of my room because he's there, so I had to move into my other room there. Okay, what else happened? So the idea of the futures wheel actually came out of the idea of having young kids think in an anticipatory way about some event. And then that evolved into what I've developed what we call futuristic curriculum development. The idea is to take any curriculum, no matter what it is. This can go all the way through graduate school down to first grade, doesn't matter. The first quarter of time, whatever it was, you take notes in such a way, if you're saying what's going to be more or less. So if you're doing it, let's say Africa, what's going to be more in Africa, what's going to be less in Africa. So you're basically trying to identify trends. If you're in daycare center, you ask the kids to bring in magazines, pile them on the floor, and say tear out pictures that are getting to be less. You put them on one wall, and that's getting to be more, put it on the other wall. And then you have the sense of the past and the sense of the future. Very simply done. So in the second time period, I'd ask people to say, okay, if that's the change going on, what's that going to look like, in 10 years or 20 years or whatever the teacher and the students want to do? And then they describe that with paintings or murals or whatever it happens to be. And then you say, okay, the third period, you're still teaching whatever you're teaching. You still have the same textbooks, same exams, all that. But at some point you say, okay, correct that scenario. Make the better one. Right? Then the third time period, you say, take it back to the present tense. So, okay, what do you have to do to learn and so forth? So that answers the question, what do I have to learn to create a better future?
That's an excellent idea. Yeah. Look,
and that was called, by the way, that was the first use of the word futuring. Long before
really?
it was 1971. I wrote in 71, didn't get published until January 72 in Instructor magazine, it's an education magazine. Right. To my knowledge, that's the first use of the word futuring.
Really, that's awesome. Hey,
Yeah,
have you got
I
any
think so.
links to that technique? Is there any like the like online writings about that?
I'd
What would
have
it
to
be?
scan the old art. Instructor magazine. This is like 1972. You know, they didn't have
Wow, that's
a lot
older
of
than
internet
me.
archiving. It's a while ago. But yeah,
Wow.
if I can track it down, I may have a scan of the article somewhere
Hmm.
and send it.
I reckon that'd be awesome. I'd add that
It's
to a
also
little
in the
article.
future. Don't think of the future as reprinted as well. It's also in technological forecasting and social change. I think they had it there a long time ago. Various versions of it.
Right.
But that's
Okay.
back in the early 70s.
Yeah,
Anyway,
if you do have a scanned copy, that'd be really cool. I mean, it'd
yeah.
be nice to see like some sort of, I don't know, digital representation of what was going on, like 42 years ago, and where are we today? What will futurology look like in another 42 years? Will we be a lot better at it?
Well, there's been several conferences that ask the question, "What's the future of future studies?" And they usually come out saying the same thing: far more participatory, becomes normalized like history. I mean, you know, if you're looking at something, it's normal to talk about the history of something, so that when you learn something, you ought to know about its past, its potential futures, its present tense, the gap between what is, what ought, what policies to address. This becomes a normalized thing,
Hmm.
and it's not a big deal. Just like we take seriously design.
Hmm.
We take seriously, human relations and ethics and so forth.
Hmm.
So it would be the idea that it becomes more normalized in culture.
Hmm. Awesome. Well,
And then, of course, very fancy computer operation programs and artificial intelligence to do a lot of stuff as well.
yes, decision support systems for the
Yeah,
win,
right,
right?
right.
So
You got your duplicate you avatar. You know, Dmitry, the guy in Russia, with
yep.
your avatar that you teach to be yourself is your portable brain with you, helping along the line and collaborating with other sort of if-then scenarios.
Hmm. And
So there's a
hopefully,
decent fancy stuff too.
hopefully our digital silicon secretaries don't actually replace us. So we teach them to be nice, even more nice than we are, right? So
Well, your headset didn't replace your ears,
yes, mm, that's
right?
it.
Your microphone didn't replace your larynx, right?
Mm. Yeah, but I still have my larynx and I still use it, and people still listen to my larynx.
Ah.
Hmm. Mostly. I'd like to think so anyway. So I'm just wondering, like, holding future days is something that we want to promote. People get involved and get active. Now, is there any like easy to run, like workshopy sort of techniques that we can hold as part of Future Day around the world that makes it fun and engaging instead of just having like lectures or speakers get up there and talk?
Well, the round the world conversation is sort of a novel idea. To my knowledge, it's the first one that was ever done like that
Sure.
on any subject, let alone the future. We may not do it, by the way, this year because I sent a note to the World Federation of Future Studies and didn't get any uptake on that. Because last time we cooperated with various organizations, and so I don't know if we're going to do it or not. We'll see. But the idea, when we did it, we had a fair at the University of Massachusetts so you'd have like a carnival environment of all kinds of future stuff, inflatable housings and environments and solar panels were a far out idea. So we would take all sort of as the futurists would call them, futuribles, the things of the future, and make like a county fair out of the thing.
Hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, what about some like easy to run workshop techniques that people can find and utilize for making their local Future Day a more participatory event? Like
Yeah. Well, what would be nice is if, as people discuss things, that the conclusion would be, what do I do
hmm.
differently
Yep.
as a result of this meeting, or as a result of this day? What do I do differently that I wouldn't have done otherwise?
Sure.
I'd focus on that sort of stuff, the action side.
Yeah.
But all many film festivals are nice too, where you have all kinds of images. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff, on YouTube, just a plethora of different sorts of things, which is sort of fun.
Yeah.
Visuals are nice.
Hmm.
And there's Second Life and 3D environments to be in, and now you got the Oculus Rift that people can be in. I don't know, is somebody doing something in Second Life or one of the other 3D environments?
We had one as part of the first Future Day, and somebody put their hand up to organise one, and the advice was do it and people will come. I don't know whether that's been followed up on. I think that most of the Future Days are going to be either online or local community events. I'm holding a community event in Melbourne, as well as getting involved with online activities as well. But like the community event in Melbourne, look, yeah, it does require a bit of organisation. You've got to get a venue and you've got to track down speakers and all that sort of thing. So yeah, it's worth it because people get to network and with people who are in their local time zone. So
why not push out the idea of creating some flash mobs?
Oh yeah. That's a good idea. Yep.
Think of what's a futuristic sort of thing in each major city in the world, or an icon like the Eiffel Tower, or everybody 12 noon at the Eiffel Tower, hands up for the future or something like that.
Yeah,
Flash mobs are an easy thing.
Yes, that's true, and that's a really good idea. We've thought of something like that, but we didn't really call it a flash mob. But yeah, I think that's a good way of phrasing it, like going to the football and suddenly shouting "Future Day" or something like that. There's yeah, and doing a Mexican wave. And there are going to be people in Edmonton, who have asked the Kim Soles, who have asked the local council to turn the lights on this famous bridge over there. And that at a certain time, and they'll do that. And then I think I've asked Kim to give a little speech in front of a camera with that in the background. And yeah, it'll be in celebration for Future Day. So yeah, Kim Solis is great. He's very active. He's a doer, and I really like that. So yeah, he's got something going. Yeah. So let's talk about the Futures Wheel technique. What is the Futures Wheel technique, and how can people use it?
Well, the Futures Wheel technique might be the most used futures technique by futurists themselves. It's not fancy. It's sort of like in an office, a paperclip is not much. It's a simple little thing, but the paperclip is still used a lot. The idea is you just take either a trend or you take an event, and then you write it in the middle of a piece of paper, or you put it in the middle of a computer program, and you say, if that occurs, the way we think it is, what else will occur? So that you draw little lines out from the center, like a wheel, and you put little circles on each of those and say, well, if synthetic biology is going to happen, then what else will happen as a result of it? Well, new organisms and so forth will do different kinds of functions. And then there'll be new regulations about that. And so you have all these little things coming out. The first order consequences people are pretty good at. Then the second order consequences, you forget about the thing in the middle, and you say, well, all right, if these things out here are happening, what happens from each of these? What fans out from those? So then that gives you the second order consequences. Then you do it again, out to the third order consequences. And you try to get as organized as possible because it can turn into spaghetti pretty fast. Because we tend to have orientations in our mind one way or another and leave some things out, I've suggested sometimes draw like a little X or line through this to have little quadrants or 8 sections or 4 sections or 10 sections to say, okay, what are the consequences in the environment? What are the consequences in governance? What are the consequences in environment? What are the consequences in economics? So that as you're looking at rippling out future consequences in all directions of something, you're looking at it more holistically. So you don't think of it just economically or just, technologically. That's how and so a lot of futurists will sit there in a desk, myself included sometimes, you draw it, and what are the consequences? What are the consequences? What are the consequences? Right, I forgot about that. So it helps you organize some of your thinking, and because all it is line and circle, It's also used by a lot of futurist workshops where if a workshop isn't going quite as fast and nice as you'd like, you can stop and say, okay, let's do a futures wheel on that idea. All of a sudden you engage the whole group. What are the consequences? So it's like a structured brainstorming and focusing a group's attention.
Wow, that sounds like a good technique actually. I might use that. I have to read up about it though, for my little Future Day thing in Melbourne.
You could do a Futures wheel on Futures Day. You
Yeah.
can do Futures Day, circle around. What else goes with Futures Day? Well, you do some of these webcasts and maybe an around the world conference, whatever, and then you might want to do a little exercise for yourself just to help you think it through.
That's not bad. That's a pretty good idea. All right. Well, yeah. Well, I'm going to commit to doing that. There we go. I've set it online, and people can get back to me and shout me down if I do not. I'm not sure if I'll do it at the Future Day, but I'll definitely do it. And you won't be able to tell if I haven't done it because I can just say I've done it in my own private time. But that's cheating. I don't like cheating. So. Well, tell me then. Yeah, that sounds like a nice little technique that people can use for any local Future Day activities that they hold. So that's at least that's one there we can use. Well, let me ask you, what about the State of the Future report that's been going on for some time? How did that start? And it seems to be going for many years now, and seems to have got quite a bit of following. Tell me, what's the history of the State of the Future report?
Right.
And tell me about where it's going.
Yeah. It's originally it's sort of a management technique. The idea was that, as I mentioned before in the beginning, we've had a lot of major future studies around the world, and they sometimes don't have much impact. And so you have all this bell curve of activity and then falls off. So if we were going to do a cumulative research so that you're building on the past insights and improving those insights and updating on an ongoing basis, you had to have some proof of that. So by having an annual report, State of the Future, say the condition of the future, then here's a book. And then you can compare that with the previous year. Is this book now better than the previous one? And so it forced us to improve. It's like part of our improvement system. How do we improve that improvement system and then continue that going forward? So it was a management technique originally. It still is. It's a very difficult management technique because it's hard to keep improving every year. You keep pushing the bar up and up and up and up and up and up. And this has been doing this now for 18 years. It's a way to bring together a lot of thinking to a large degree as well. It's sort of like how you're doing. And then we turn that into a State of the Future index as well, creating a global report card where we're winning, where we're losing. So it's a way of sort of like pulling the whole, as much as possible, the system together. So that's how that evolved. I thought I wasn't going to write them anymore. A couple of years ago, we started putting together the Global Futures Intelligence System. I thought, that's got so much more information and so much better organized than a book, for God's sake. This is way beyond the book. But no, they want to have a physical book.
People use physical books.
Yeah, they do. So anyway,
like linear.
Sorry?
People like linear.
Yeah, well, there we have it. So I'm starting to work on the next one as we speak.
So tell me about this Futures Intelligence project you mentioned. What is that?
Yeah, well, it comes out of the collective intelligence tradition a bit. How do you bring together information, software, and humans and mix them together so that they upgrade and improve each other on an ongoing basis? And anybody can go see the surface of it. They don't have to subscribe if they don't want to. They can go see the surface. It's THEMP, THEMP.org, as in the Millennium Project, but THEMP.org. And they can skim around. They can go through the 15 challenges, overviews. They can't see the methods are in there, but they have to subscribe to get that and some of the research. But the idea is, how do we create a common platform for us to think together? Yeah, I'll say that. Okay. Okay, you too. So we've got tons of good minds out there working on tons of important issues, but we don't put it into a common platform for a collective intelligence. And when I use the word collective intelligence, I don't mean prediction markets, because I realize that's very popularly the term that's used there. because I'm meaning collective intelligence as an emergent property, like your mind is a continuous emerging property all the time. So you dip into your mind and ideas come out at different times. So I see this the same way. So it's an ongoing collective intelligence system. So it's a common platform for us to think together. That's the idea. That's where we're going. Hopefully that gets going well enough that I can lean back and put my feet up and just use it like everybody else.
Instead of having to rewrite a new report each year. Yeah.
That's right.
Well, that's a lot of work for 18 years of your life. How much time does it take to do one State of the Future report, may I ask?
Well, in a sense, we're doing it all the time because we use the Global Futures Intelligence System as an ongoing updating process. So I'm pulling into that as well as peer reviews for other people. There's about 10 different methods that we use to update it. So in a sense, we're doing it all the time. But in the sense of actually writing and getting, nervous about making any deadlines, that's usually about 3 months.
Okay.
And it's extremely detailed. But then again, we don't rewrite every word because if certain policies are good policies, there's no reason to throw it out. So it's more like sculpting than writing in a sense, where you can make that sculpture a little better, a little more precise. So it's as much like sculpting as it is writing.
Okay. Let me ask you. I think in one of your previous interviews, you spoke about pessimism with regard to the future. A lot of the narratives that we know about the future are built on something that goes wrong, and the sky is falling and all that sort of thing. So, what do you think of pessimism as like the basis for an intellectual position on the state of the future? Where we're heading in the future? Is it healthy? Is it useful? Where does it go too far? What's your thoughts?
I think it's a coward's position. The reason I call it a coward's position is because if you think everything will get worse, there's nothing you can do, you're off the hook. You don't have to do anything. If you say, hey, the future can be better, then people say, well, how? How are you going to do that? So there's work for an optimist has to do some work. Pessimist doesn't have to do any work. He says, it's all nonsense. I'm not going to deal with it. And furthermore, pessimism and optimism is sort of, in my judgment, sort of a waste of time anyway. The question is, what are you going to do? What do you need to know? What are you going to do? That's important. Being optimistic or pessimistic, I think, is silly. I mean, a flying saucer can come in and land on top of your building there, and all the forecasts are out, right? We have no idea. We don't know. But what we can know what future problems are, and we can know certain strategies. So what we've got to do is, what are we going to do? That's the question, not whether you're an optimist or pessimist. And if you're not going to do anything, then fine, I don't want to deal with you. I want to deal with those people who do something.
So, talking about that, then, how do we know that what we're doing is making good progress? How do we know that we're winning instead of losing?
Well, we have about 29, 30 indicators that came about through some Delphi questionnaires around the world. We send it out to our nodes around the world and say, okay, if we're improving, what do you measure? If we're not improving, what do you measure? So we had a whole bunch of indicators. Then we had to get like 20 years of data to get a 10-year projection. We just made up a 2-to-1 ratio. There's nothing religious about it, but it seems to be reasonable. And then we ask people, what's the best possible for that indicator in 10 years? What's the worst possible, plausible in 10 years? So that gives, so if bad is averaged together, it turns into 0, and good is averaged together and turns into 1, and that gives a range of 0 to 1 through which those 20 years gets drawn. So it's like 0.5 or 0.6 or whatever it is. And you can add all those together, and you make an index. So it's a state of the future index of a 10-year future. And that gives us the ability to say, here, which ones are we winning, which ones are we losing at? To my knowledge, this is the most systematic approach to the question of whether we're winning or losing, because we went through these nodes around the world and questionnaires and repeated them several times. So we've done these iterations several times, so that we can actually say, if you think the future is better in 10 years, what does that mean? Does it mean more Cadillacs? Does it mean more PhDs? What does it mean? It's not a perfect indicator, but it's far superior to the gross national index. And it's far superior to the human development index that has been done before. And it also forces people to think. And we do it with the globe, but we also have national ones as well. So countries have to ask the question, if Bulgaria is better in 10 years, what does that mean, really? And that exercise is a good one to go through.
Excellent. Yeah, it'd be good to get a link for that. Yeah,
well, it's on. You can do it. You can do a Google search, State of the Future Index, and you'll get some stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so how do we know what the most important things are to measure? Let me ask you this.
Well, we don't. Our approach is simply the questionnaires around the world, and you're averaging together the best insights that you can get. I mean, you can do econometric modeling, but the trouble with econometric modeling is you're still making judgments of what the heck the elements within the model are.
Right.
And you can say, well, we've got some empirical stuff about the relationship. Okay, that's fine. But Herman Kahn, a futurist, a major invented scenarios and so forth, used to make the comment, by the time you know enough of your computer model, the dynamics have changed enough that it's no longer predictive, as it would have been before. So then that goes back to human judgment. How do we take the data and human judgment and the software and pull it together and say, okay, this is the best we got so far. And then we get feedback all the time from around the world as well. So that's the cumulative process, and that's why the State of the Future Index, because then you integrate that feedback and hopefully improve your analysis as you go forward.
So what style of feedback, I mean, like, what is it about the feedback in this big process which you've seen as being an effective way to update the sorts of questions you should be asking, the sorts of approaches to analyzing the future? Is it just general consensus on what the right questions are to ask, or is there something else?
Well, we've done it in a variety of ways. We don't have a single way of doing that. I'm glad you asked that question. Here's one of the unique ways we did it. We've done it twice. I'm in Washington, D.C., so they got a bunch of embassies here. So we did a thing on the future science and technology. So we held a meeting. The science at a shake.
Yeah.
What's that?
That's the moniker of the sort of initiative I'm running, sort of with my website and.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then you may want to go through. I'll jump ahead and come back. We put together a lot of interviews down the road in that study, and the text is a lot of stuff. There's so much in there. We haven't had a great job of it. You may want to send you some of that to go through it. A lot of interesting insights in that. But then now rewind back to where we started. We had a meeting of science attachés in Washington, D.C., I don't know, 30 different embassies. Australia was there too, by the way. And the question was, I said, look, we're going to do this study. I want to know from you what question you want answered that is useful enough that you'll turn around to your own country and say, who are the best science and technology brains to respond? So we use the attachés both to help set the questions and to identify around the world, in their countries, who the best brains were. Now, we also use our nodes around the world, too. But the original first step was a blank piece of paper saying, okay, what questions are worth asking? And then we rated the questions as well. What questions are really worthwhile? So that's one approach. Another approach, we did Middle East peace scenarios. The way we wanted that, we did about a year's worth of research on what's been done and treaties and counterpoints and all of that, and got a list of stuff, and then went and interviewed different people and considered the entire alphabet soup of the Middle East, and then that rarefied down to a bunch of questions. So that's a completely different approach to doing the questions. We don't have a set way of doing these things because it's a creative think tank itself, right? So as we're like right now, we're working on what are the important questions for this future of work stuff. There's been tons of study on the future work, so we don't want to do it, repeat all that stuff. And there's been tons of comments about the future of artificial intelligence. Okay, fine. What questions haven't been answered well? We'll ask people that. And what questions haven't been asked that ought to be asked? So that we'll go through a process of that, and then we'll come up finally with the Delphi. So we're in that process as we speak right now. Matter of fact, what I was editing just before you came on was exactly that.
just for the benefit of all us viewers, I'd like to ask, what do you mean by a Delphi? A Delphi index, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Well, a Delphi was invented at the Rand Corporation back in the 50s and 60s as a way to get the judgments of experts that might not sit in the same room. And if they did sit in the same room, their personalities might be too persuasive rather than their judgments. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
Right? So you have an anonymous, and sometimes some people don't want to respond to somebody else's stuff, right? They say, well, I don't want to deal with that guy. Right? Well, a Delphi allows ideas to be persuasive, and then you have the answers then create the second questionnaire. So let's say you didn't want to deal with somebody's idea. If you didn't, then that idea continues on. So if you don't have a counter to that idea, or you don't show the faultiness of that idea, or you show what's wrong in that forecast, then you're out. In a sense, your position is not in there. So it forces people to respond and give feedback to what they might not have done had you had a physical meeting. So the Delphi would have 2, 3, or 4 rounds, and each round is based upon the previous one, and it is extremely excellent process. I still say that today. Now, that's if you have time. If, on the other hand, because you can take easily 6 months for a good Delphi to be done, or maybe a year. But let's say you don't have a lot of time. So the Secretary General of the UN calls up and says, "Look, we've got to have our position on whatever it is in 3 days." Delphi can't handle that. So the next evolution is called a real-time Delphi. So there you put the main questions up there, and you say, "Okay, everybody, this time in 3 days, whatever is there, that's the report, goes to the Secretary General's desk, and that's it." So you can come back as often as you want to. So there's no rounds, in a sense. You make as many rounds as you want to, but you can still see the other people's responses. You don't see their names, but you see their responses. So you can respond to that. So you can say, "That's a good idea only in these circumstances, but not these circumstances." Then somebody else can see that and say, "Yes, but those circumstances were changed because of this new treaty." So then if you're having an organized discussion, in a sense, then at the end of 3 days, bingo, on the Secretary of the UN's desk, there's your report. So that's the second iteration, called a real-time Delphi. The third iteration, we have in the process of putting it into our global future system, and that is you create the question when the question is clear in your mind. So each question goes in whenever it's ready, and when there's enough answers, those answers come out and go into the situation chart or go in the report or wherever they're going. And you can have different demographic questions for each question. Whereas when you do a questionnaire, you come in, these are the demographics, what's your age, what's your education, what's your geography, and that's the same demographic analysis for every single question. Well, that's not always good, because certain questions, certain demographic issues are different than others. So imagine a Delphi where the questions are going in and out on an ongoing basis. So there's no beginning or end to the Delphi. It's an ongoing process. Because in Delphi, if you've done them, you know that there's a point where no matter how many new people come in, the numbers they put in and the text they put in, nothing really changes much more. And you never know necessarily exactly whether that's 100 people or 10 people or 1,000 people, but at some point it's clear. There's nothing else changing. It's done. Take the question out. And then you come up with a new question, maybe based on this or based on something else, boom, you put it in. So that's the third one. We don't have a name for this kind of a Delphi yet, but that's where Delphis go.
Excellent. Yes. So let me ask: are you using this Delphi method as part of the GIFs, the Global Future Information System?
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. Is under each of the 15 global challenges, there's a menu. There's news. The news goes into scanning. The scanning goes into situation chart. The situation chart goes into reports. What are the best resources? What are the best books? What are the best papers, and so forth. But then we want to have a section around Delphi. So we'd have Delphi, the third version of Delphi, in each of the 15 global challenges. We put it in before, but we wanted to work it over some more, so that we're doing some software development on it right now.
Right. Look, let me ask you now. We've spoken about tech tools and techniques, and for thinking about the future, we've spoken about Future Day. We've spoken about history. Let's speak about some interesting examples of what to think about. I mean, like, people know me because I'm very interested in like the impact of artificial intelligence and automation. And you brought that up. What will AI look like in the future? If we were to look at the progress of AI through a series of filters and see what could come out at the end, we could do this with lots of things like nanotechnology. But let's stick with AI now. In the medium to long terms, where do you think are the most likely scenarios? What do the most likely scenarios look like for the next 15 years, for the next 30 to the next 45?
Okay. I wrote a book called Future Mind some years back, and it was what we call conscious technology. The publisher had the word Future Mind. I wanted to call it conscious technology, but I lost out. Publishers always run it. The Japanese, by the way, version, they call it Future Heart. Sort of nice. Anyway, the idea was that you would have two mega trends. One is that we are being technologically augmented in a variety of ways. Technology in our bodies, on our bodies, micro-miniaturized, all that sort of stuff that you talk about. At the same time, it's also being augmented, our physical environment is being augmented by artificial intelligence, sensors, networks, blah, 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 etc. So the physical environment seems to become conscious. You talk to the wall talks to you, you talk to your clothes talks to you, all that sort of environment going on. The same thing there for your body. Your body is being technologically augmented. At some point, those two massive trends start to merge into a continuum between consciousness and technology. So the great visions of the mystics in the past that will become this great oneness and enlightenment and so forth, well, this seems to be maybe the mechanics of how that actually can occur. How well that occurs is not clear, because there's a lot of nasty stuff, as you know, as well. So my attitude is you take the attitude of the mystic, not the metaphysics of the mystic.
Okay,
good.
good.
But the attitude's important. Attitude's important. Mystic, we don't, the metaphysics is a different issue. But to take the attitude of the mystic, and then you take the knowledge and organization of the technocrat, you put those two together, and you can get a better harmony in society. Like if you have a party, you got a choice. Two parties, one a bunch of mystics. And by the way, when I say mystic, I mean sharing consciousness as a strategy, not religion. Right? That's a bureaucratization of the mystic experience. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the mystic. Right? So imagine you have a choice of two parties. One party is a bunch of mystics. Another party is a bunch of technocrats. Which party is going to be more fun? But if the plumbing breaks down in a room, you want to have the technocrats fix it. So you need both. It's like when you play a piano. The piano, the tuning, the mind, the music, the composition, all becomes like one orchestration. That's when it works well. We need society to have the mystic and technocrat merge well, and our technology and consciousness merge well. So that's where I would say is the long-range trend. Some pieces I would pull out of that might be more interesting for your audience is the idea that we could all become technologically augmented geniuses.
Yep.
Right?
I hope
so. So if you but imagine a world in 2050 of about 9.6 or so billion people, and the majority of these people are technologically augmented geniuses. This is extraordinary future.
I agree. Well, let's even look at today. I mean, we can say that with Google being at our ego's fingertips, in a sense, we have access to information and can pull answers that most geniuses wouldn't have been able to pull in a short time frame 100 years ago. So in a sense, we're already seeing the hints of what you're talking about now.
Right. Yes. That's right. Now that also can be good or bad, because you don't want to have a bunch of genius Hitlers, right?
Yeah.
So we did it when we were doing some scenarios in the future of science and technology. Elizabeth Floresca, the director of research at Millennium Project, said, "No, wait a minute. This idea of doing genetic development so that everybody's born a genius that wants to be born a genius, we don't want to have a bunch of genius Hitlers. Why can't we figure out the genetic material for compassion? Can we make it a rule, as if we can enforce the rule, but nevertheless a rule that you can do genetic enhancement for your offspring's intelligence, but they've got to have compassion going with that IQ genetic material."
Yes. Right. Yeah.
These are the things we thought about, and one of the things we're looking at, we're worried about right now, is the idea of an individual being able to make alone and deploy alone a weapon of mass destruction. Right now we talk about lone wolves with a shotgun shooting up a bunch of people. Well, what happens if they're leaving genetic material in synthetic biology in a variety of locations, and let your imagination go with that? That can be quite a mess. We have to figure out how to prevent that. There's technological means, there's some reducing mental illness means, but the one that's not being addressed, in my judgment, is what's the public's role? And that's one of the studies. That's one of the studies the Millennium Project would like to do. We haven't gotten funding for that one yet.
Well,
but there's a lot of downsides to this too.
Yes, well, there's an interesting saying, and it's that the IQ points needed for someone to create a doomsday machine goes down by 1 point every year. Alternatively, the general IQ point of people go up, and whether the twain shall meet, we may be in for a very nasty shock. So
that's right.
Yeah. Look, we've covered as part of this podcast vidcast series. We've covered moral enhancement with Julian Savulescu, James Hughes, and a variety of other people, and also with David Pearce and his sort of hedonistic imperative and the abolitionist project. I've done a heap of interviews with David Pearce and James Hughes. These are particularly interesting topics to me. Yeah, so I see them as being very important issues. How do we make people coerce, force people to be more moral, and what does that even mean? Very difficult questions to answer at the moment. However, there are some things which have proven to, or seem to have proven, empirically at least, to make people more considerate of other people, and also to make better judgments. It's not necessarily about having just compassion. You can still make bad judgments. You can compassionately accidentally kill some people, or severely delimitate their potential for progress and flourishing. Maybe you can say that some religions who have like extreme compassion because they don't want people to go to some version of hell, they want to save souls and spend so much time in their life and cause people to chant mantras or Hail Mary or this, that, and the other, and that just wastes time, and they're no longer productive members of society. So, it's very interesting.
Well, a little anecdote on that. When we were doing the Middle East peace scenarios, the whole idea of ethics and morality and terrorism and all that sort of stuff was involved. And one of the suggestions was to use something like UNESCO to work with ethicists and philosophers around the world and say, how do we put this in elementary school, middle school, high school, universities, public education, advertising, adult education, and sort of how do we make the world more moral, right? Or at least more ethical, if not more moral. And I'll never forget one person, one of the, I won't say what particular group, but one of the ones that people might consider terrorist type of group, said, okay, I'm prepared to do that if you're prepared to have the same curriculum in Chicago. Because a lot of times we point our finger at other people. You have to be moral. Or we have to be moral. And then we've got to focus on pointing at we have to become moral. And that's extremely important. It's extreme. I mean, in the 15 challenges, they're not in order of priority. Just like the circulatory system is not more important than the nervous system, right?
Mm-hmm.
So challenge 15 is on ethics.
Mm.
How do you deal with global ethics? How do you get ethics in your decision making? How does that work out? It's extremely important.
One of the topics that comes up quite a bit, recently at least, is the future of work, and the future of our ability to gain some form of income to sustain our living standards in a future where there's so much automation, there's so much a narrowing bandwidth of employment opportunities. We've seen historically, horses have been replaced by machines. There's not many horses left compared to, or at least a percentage of the population of the world of horses compared to humans. They used to be excellent like tools for us, and they used to be excellent drivers of the economy. Now not so much. What about us? The beasts of burden have been replaced by tractors. A lot of our burden-oriented work has been replaced by machines as well. And so I guess collectively we graduated to more intellectual styles of labor over these thousands of years. Now we have IT experts coming in and replacing people's jobs. And we have AI being able to do all sorts of interesting stuff. We have decision support systems that enable managers to, augment their decision-making process, business intelligence, data mining. If we ever achieve general intelligence, what will that mean for society? Where do the dividends of all these many millenniums of human endeavor end up going in such a world? Do they go to everybody?
Yeah. Well, that's, as I mentioned, that's one of the things we're getting organized now to do a global assessment on these questions.
Excellent.
So we'll see how that turns out. My own view on it is that economics, or economists, I should say, tend to think of the world like, how many people do you need to be employed to make civilization work? And then all the rest of them are worthless. Now, you could also ask the question differently. How many people do you need to make civilization work? And how many people do you need to make civilization worthwhile? Well, I don't know. How worthwhile do you want civilization to be? Western history. But that's the idea. You can have it worthwhile in completely different ways. It can be quite a rich future. We like to say in Western history that philosophy began with the leisurely priestly caste of Egypt. Plato quotes Socrates as saying, Diana, they got this wisdom from these Egyptian folks and all that sort of stuff. Well, out of that came philosophy and mathematics and all kinds of fabulous stuff. Well, that was a small group. What happens if you got your 9.6 billion people augmented geniuses in a leisurely priestly caste? So if you only need a certain percentage, the rest of these people can be quite creative. Now, someone says, well, how are you going to pay for all that? That's a good question. The Millennium Project was created out of Ted Gordon and myself. We just invented it. We didn't request, there's no request for proposals, there's no job interviews. We just did it. Just started. It created out of nothing. And it's been continually ongoing, created like this. Now, what happens if more and more people start to say, hey, I am surrounded today by 40% of humanity. Out of that 40% of humanity, what percentage of that is interested in what I want to do? Well, very small percent. Well, a very small percent of 40% of humanity is a hell of a lot of people. The example I like to give is juggling. I know that if I juggle, it's good for my brain, but I don't always remember to do it every day. If, on the other hand, I took that little juggling website and say, I'll teach you how to juggle in 30 minutes, and your money back guaranteed, unless you've got to get 3 of them, at least 3 juggles, or you don't pay, but then 10 euros if you do. Well, how many people in the world would like to learn how to juggle? with money back guaranteed if they don't do it. Well, maybe what, 1 million people, maybe 10 million people. Well, at 10 euros a pop, that's a pretty big income, right? So that's just one idea. You take a witch doctor in the middle of Africa. How many people want to have a diagnosis or a consultancy from a real live witch doctor, right? With his nephews doing the English translation because the witch doctor may not speak English. You know, a lot of people. There's a lot of stuff that we can do and meander through our life, exploring who we are and making a living at it. That's not even in the cards in education in the present tense. So that's how many people could make a living like that? Potentially everybody. Potentially everybody. Now, a lot of people cannot or don't have that self-confidence to do that, I realize. So one of the things, I'm a consultant to the European Union on some stuff, just came back from stuff. And one of the ideas that I had in there, I said, look, you've got an aging population, it's costing you a fortune, the people are living, all the financial problems Europe's got. I said, look, why can't you get people who are already making a living on internet, who are over the normal retirement age, that have them train the people 5 years or so before they retire, so they start to learn who you are, what are your interests and skills, what's the advantage of where you are. If you're living in Paris, maybe you take people teletourism on your Google Glass in the Louvre Museum, whatever it is. How can you make a living out of being the person you want to be and then having people pay for those experiences? That is one slice of it. Another slice of it, the whole biological revolution coming up, is going to be gigantic. It could even be larger than the Industrial Revolution. If so, that's a lot of jobs coming out of that thing as well. At the same time, the idea of artificial intelligence updating its code on a moment-by-moment basis, replicating perfectly around the world day by day, could very well knock out an awful lot of work and make us lazy slobs at the same time. And there's a lot of downsides to this sort of stuff, too. So that's why one of the reasons why I want to look at it. We want to look at it in a systematic way, pulling all the arguments together on both sides and everything. So we'll probably do scenarios of here's how the new kinds of jobs and new kinds of work and new kinds of economic assumptions occur. And here's how we don't make those decisions. We stumble into a bad, unemployed future. And maybe third, what are new economic assumptions anyway? We have said in most countries of the world that high school is a basic requirement. So we make that free based upon taxes. Should we do the same thing with universities? Because we progress far enough, should university education be universal worldwide? Well, we got the MOOCs and the online courses, so maybe the price can come down for knowledge. So the idea of giving people their education and giving people some sort of basic income based upon the situation in different countries and different amounts and so forth may not be so crazy. But we have to show a financial cause and effect link up to those points to show how you can financially make it that way. And if it can't be made that way, then we got to really force back on that other scenario of how we create new kinds of livings for people and new kinds of being. And we've got all kinds of advantages to making that possible. It's not a done deal that we have structural unemployment. It's not a done deal at all. But I agree, if we don't get creative, large-scale structural unemployment is inevitable unless we make some major changes coming up.
All right. Yeah, it has been mentioned by a number of people that the way to solve the problem is some form of income guarantee. If we believe that the value of society isn't actually the GDP or the continual improvement of economic growth, and it's actually the collection of subjective experience of the actual agents within the society, and that's what we measure as being useful, and the measure of progress. The more people are getting happier, the more people are flourishing, then that would be useful, and maybe that would indicate that we should be spending. We should give people an income or some form of basic resources to survive and to flourish. If we live in a world where everything via automation and the less need to pay people to do stuff, means that everybody gets stuff like really cheaply, then maybe one way to deal with it is the basic income guarantee, and this becomes more and more convincing to me once we start going beyond Earth. And now that may not be anytime soon, but ultimately we're going to have to do that if we're going to be resilient and more flexible civilization to survive, I guess, an inevitable long-term cataclysmic event, like, asteroids hitting the world or like solar flares or anything other. But yeah, wow. Poochie. So that's something that a lot of futurists have spoken about. James Hughes, Ben Goertzel the other day, other people. What are your thoughts on basic income guarantee? Surely it's coming on your radar.
I want to see a financial plan. It's one thing to say, well, here we make it happen. Right, okay, who pays for it? Let's say you're Greece. Greece is going through this financial crisis as we speak. So then you say to Greece, okay, these people are retiring in their 50s, and then the Germans say, well, you lazy son of a guns, you're retiring 10 years before everybody else in the world, and you want us to bail you out, right? So that's not working now.
Yes, right.
So then how do you just turn around and say, okay, government, now we want you to pay even more out, based upon what? Now, yes, there's a lot of substitutions that you can do. There's no question about it. But what I want to see is a financial plan, how you make the transition from today to there. Where's the money flows go for it? Can we actually make it work? I think it's probably possible, but it's not a done deal. And every time I press hard on people, the argument starts to fall apart.
Right.
Doesn't mean it's not possible. It's just that you've got to show how it financially works. And obviously how it works in one country is going to be different than another country. But then you've got to factor in all kinds of stuff, as you started to point out. If our manufacturing processes can be so good and so precise, and the unit cost can go down so low, the cost of living could go down. If the cost of living goes down, then you have to factor that in with the substitution, because if you're not paying money on unemployment, or you're not paying money on it, but you're paying the basic income, you got to add that up. And there's some straightforward financial mathematics to be done. And I want to see the discussion move in that direction, because then it becomes real. Because the people that don't want it, they don't want it because you figure you're going to become lazy and you're going to do a financial disaster. All right, so then you got to show why people won't become lazy. Well, that's because you're going to make a living out of being yourself. And you're interested in being yourself, for God's sake, or commit suicide if you don't want to be yourself, or be somebody else in an avatar space. But then you can still make a living in an avatar space as well. In any case, there's some hard work of financial transitions to be done. And until that's done, in my judgment, it's not going to work. And people won't go for it.
Yeah, I guess we still live in society in a world where with the ethos that if you can't produce enough, if you're unable to, then you can be left out in the wilderness, like like the which I think was the Stoics, or some Greek colony used to do this. They used to, where they thought the child was a little bit weaker than the others or slightly malformed, they'd leave him in the wilderness to die, to fend for themselves, and they just get eaten or starve or freeze to death or whatever.
I don't see that
happening. Moved beyond that time, at least in the first world and much of the third world. Yeah. And
but see, I see people making this transition. It'll take a while, but I think I can see people making the transition of, like, even each day, what's going on in the world that's interesting to you that you want to play with. Some of it you have to pay for, some of it's free, some of it you get paid for. There's a friend of mine, used to be a financial guy, and what he does is he makes this $500 or $1,000 in the morning, and then the rest of the day he just plays. He's creating his own life. He's just creating his own life. More and more people can create their own life, so it's not just that you're just going to give everybody income. You're giving them that as part of that transition. But I would suspect as we make that transition, people might very well be able, because this goes back to making civilization worthwhile. People pay for art. People pay for music. Is art and music necessary? Well, it's necessary for a good life, but it's not necessary for basic survival.
Mm.
How much good life can we have? You know?
Yeah. Mm. Yeah. So
But this goes back to like the transition. It's just like when someone says, "I need a bridging loan," like Greece, they want a bridging loan. Fine. How do we do the bridging loan, so to speak? How do we make that transition financially? If that gets nailed down in a plausible way, then that possible future is more likely.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Well, what do you think? Okay. We're into our discussion now for about like an hour and 20 minutes, I believe. So an hour and 10, sorry. Yeah. So, what do you think the most important things for viewers to take home regarding Future Day and approaches to thinking about the future? What are people? What's some? How would you conclude this discussion by giving people some mental tools or exercises to think about and suggestions for improving Future Day?
Okay. Well, one is I'd like people to realize that we're winning more than we're losing as a species, but where we're losing is deadly serious. So you don't have a right to go to sleep, but you don't have a right to be pessimistic either. And those uncertainties, you can do some future wheels with yourself or with other people and discuss them and figure out what you can do yourself with your own uniqueness, your own interests, your own skills, and so forth, to do your part to improve the future. And to discuss whether it's optimism or pessimism, to me, is a waste of time.
Excellent. All right. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you, Jerome Glenn. And I have complete confidence that we'll be speaking again in the future. I look forward to reading about your future versions of the global the state of the future. When's the the 2014 one is already out, is it?
Yeah, 1314 is out. Yeah, people can get that. They just go to our website and they can order it there. Or they can download it, save yourself some money.
Yep, sure.
A little bit of money.
Yep. And so these happen every year. What month do they come out?
It's irregular. It used to be every July we would do it in combination with the World Food Society. But the last couple of years we didn't do it in combination with the World Food Society, but I will do it this year in combination. So it'll probably be out in mid-July or August in that time frame.
Well, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. You're doing great work, and thanks very much for spending the time with me today. And yes, this will be up in the internet soon. Hopefully, I get enough links for people to indulge in. So cheers.
Take care of yourself.
Thanks.
Happy Future Day.
Happy Future Day.